Hey everybody, I'm really glad you found Suncrest Messages. I do hope you'll take a minute to subscribe to either our podcast or our YouTube channel. And you can also download the Suncrest app. There's great stuff there that goes far beyond these messages. Either way, I hope that the next 30 minutes helps you integrate faith with your life. Enjoy. Hey Suncrest family, including all of you who have found us online over the last couple months, I just want to start by expressing my love and overwhelming gratitude for who you are. I've been thinking a lot about you over the last few months, and there's one concept above all that just jumps out to me. It's my respect for how much you are others-centered. Now, think about this with me. We shifted online, and so many of you have jumped in and stayed with us and shared everything with friends. We've had 17 people get baptized, and we just constantly see people taking next steps in this environment. And particularly last week, I had a conversation with all of you about racial injustice. It's a sensitive conversation, and trust me, I have plenty of pastor friends who are white pastors serving mostly white churches, and when they tried to tackle the subject last week, the reaction of their churches was not all that helpful. But your reaction with me has been so healthy. I've had a lot of great discussions. I've had people leaning in and trying to listen and learn and love. I remember hearing Marissa mention on her video last week the massacre in Tulsa, and I thought, I don't even know what that is. And just today, I had a friend of mine from my men's group text me and say, hey Greg, I looked that up. I'm learning. And I thought, I looked it up too. I see people stepping into this and embracing it. So I thank you for that. And of course, it's beyond these weekend experiences. You've been serving the region like crazy. We had an amazing event yesterday. We've been telling the story of how you dropped off diapers and met all these needs. You've been sewing masks. You've been giving blood. It's just an unselfish posture toward the region around us. And it includes your financial generosity. I mean, that's made an enormous difference in fueling our mission. And just in the month of May, we had 30 new households start to give financially at Suncrest. So I'm overwhelmingly grateful and have respect for your others-centeredness. And while all that celebration is true, I also want to acknowledge I might just be buttering you up a little bit, because I'm preparing to walk through one more message this week that will absolutely require others-centeredness. And this one in ways that are actually more personal in our relationships than most of the others. So we're returning to the concept of what happy people know, and we're going to tackle it for both people who are single and people who are couples today. And I got to give you a little backdrop on how we came to this point. When I was preparing these messages, at first I thought, well, we'll surely do separate messages for singles and couples. They're in such different situations. And then I had this great idea. I thought, hey, we're online right now. I could actually do one service for marrieds and one service for singles, and then you could kind of choose which service you want to watch so that nobody has to feel left out. And then I started working on those messages. And what happened was the messages turned out to be almost exactly the same. That for 95% of people in this world, if I was going to lean into what the scriptures say about what happy people know, the advice, whether you're single or whether you're a couple, is extremely similar. Not easy, but similar. And so today, I want to dive into the biggest picture concepts of what I think happy people know and weave it together in ways that are for both married people and single people. And we have some bonus content that I'll tell you about at the end for each of those particular groups. So really, there's two big ideas in this message. Here's the first one. Marriage is a covenant. Marriage is a covenant. And if you've been around Suncrest very long, you know that I love to use that word and that concept as it relates to marriage. I want you to hear just about how Jesus described it. This is what he said. At the beginning, the Creator made them male and female and said, for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no man separate. And he talks about this picture of marriage that is a union that cleaves two people together in a lifetime vow. Now, this, of course, is important for married people, but it's potentially even more important for you if you are currently single, if you're currently dating, and especially if you're currently engaged. You know, one of the things that's interesting is when I sit down with couples who are preparing to be married and I would be performing their ceremony, I always tell them that if I come across something in our conversation that makes me think you shouldn't get married, I'll tell you. Now, that's always an interesting moment in the conversations. Sometimes people start to laugh. Sometimes they laugh uncomfortably. Sometimes you see them cringe. And sometimes people will ask me, well, Greg, have you ever actually told anyone they shouldn't get married? The answer to that is yes, I absolutely have. Then people ask me, Greg, wasn't that awkward when you told people you didn't think they should get married? The answer to that is yes, it absolutely was awkward. There's no simple way or easy way or friendly way really to do that. But the reason I do it is because once I didn't. And I sensed this, that someone wasn't ready to step into making a covenant, but I didn't say anything. I performed their wedding, and it wasn't too long after that that the relationship crashed and burned and ended in divorce, and I resolved to myself, I will never again, if I see it, not say something. And while it's awkward, the most beautiful letter I've ever received from someone came from a woman who wrote to me a few years ago and said, Greg, thank you for telling me I shouldn't get married to that guy. Years had passed. She was now married to a wonderful man. They'd both grown in a way that they were prepared to be married. And she was so grateful that she did not step into a covenant with someone that she should not step into a covenant with. Now, one of the interesting things about those conversations with single people is I think they always hear me say, oh, I'll tell you if I don't think you should get married. And what they think is that I'm watching the person across the table from them, their fiance, and that my thought might be, oh, that's not a person you should marry. But when I'm in these conversations with people, I'm not looking at the other person. I'm always looking at you and saying, are you ready to step into a covenant like this? Now, I'm a big advocate for singleness. I think singleness could be a lifetime choice, or it could be a choice for a season in your life. And one of the things the scriptures constantly come back to is something that churches often don't come back to. The suggestion from the scriptures is that it's not only godly people who get married. Godly people stay single. It's not that marriage is the path to happiness. There are plenty of happy people who are single. It's not that a meaningful life depends on being married. In fact, in some ways, the suggestion is you can live an even more meaningful life if you stay single. In fact, not only was Jesus single, the other person who wrote most of the rest of the New Testament was also single, and he suggested to everyone that he wishes people would make the same decision he has. And so singleness is honorable for either a season or a lifetime. And the idea that marriage is a covenant helps you know when you're single, am I prepared to step into something like that? Now, I want to describe what a covenant is, so those who are single can think, oh, that's where this would have to go. And for those of us who are married, it reminds us who we are. One of the distinctions I often make is that there are consumer relationships and there are covenant relationships. And actually, both kinds of relationships are necessary as we make our way through life, but we should just absolutely understand the distinction. Consumer relationships are the kinds of relationships where we welcome someone into our life until they're not useful, helpful, or needed anymore. And you actually have plenty of relationships like that, and it's fine. Friends sometimes come and go. Your relationship with the person who cuts your hair or works on your car, those are all probably consumer relationships. The very nature of consumer relationships says, I'm with you until I'm not. I'm with you until it's not working anymore. I'm with you until I don't need you. I'm with you until I'm not happy. Those are consumer relationships. But covenant relationships are fundamentally different. They say, I'm with you, period. I'm with you, period. And that's what marriage is. Let me give you a couple of images between these two kinds of relationships. Consumer relationships are transactional. It always means I do something for you, and I really hope that you'll do something for me. They're usually marked by performance and scorekeeping. If you're scorekeeping in any relationship that you have right now, it's not a covenant relationship. If you're making marks of how many times he or she did something wrong, that's transactional. But covenant relationships are transformational. You love someone expecting nothing in return, and you have no desire to get paid back. One of the things about consumer relationships is they're always devoted to a picture of how life will be with this relationship. But covenant relationships are actually devoted to a person. You see, a lot of marriages take on a consumer relationship because it's built on a dream, on a picture of how life will be. It will say, oh, I can't wait until we're in this situation together, when we own this kind of home together, when our kids are this way together, when we can retire like this together. And when that dream starts to crumble or becomes impossible because of circumstances sometimes out of everyone's control, then the relationship starts to break down. But when you're devoted to a person, what you're saying in the covenant is everything I have is yours, and everything you have is mine. And even if the dream never comes true, it's okay, because I'm not devoted to the dream. I'm devoted to you. Consumer relationships dissolve based on frustration, but covenant relationships dissolve on infidelity. You know, a lot of relationships come to an end when someone says, well, this isn't what I signed up for, or I'm not happy, or she's not meeting my needs, or he's not meeting my needs. But in a covenant, that's not the basis of dissolving something. The promise is actually that when things are great and when things aren't great, better or worse, sickness or health, we're in this together. And the scriptures do give a reason for why a covenant might come to an end. And it always is about betrayal, about someone being unfaithful to you in the marriage or abandoning you in the marriage. So that's the nature of a relationship. And if you're married, today might be the day to come back and renew this covenant posture toward a relationship. And if you're not married, one of the gauges that you'll use walking through life is, am I prepared to step into a covenant like that with this particular person? But that leads us to the second big idea. I think in both marriage and singleness, we'll have to dismiss what I call the right person myth. The right person myth, you might read and think, oh, I know what you're talking about, Greg. You mean that I have a soulmate out there, that there's one right person out there in the world. And that's actually not what I'm talking about today. It would be a good conversation for another day. The right person myth is actually this, that once you meet the right person, everything will be all right. That once you meet the right person, everything will be all right. Now, I'm going to talk to singles about this in just a moment, but let me talk to the couples first on this. If you've come to the conclusion that you married the wrong person, if you think you're unhappy because you married the wrong person, if you might even be considering a change right now because you think you married the wrong person, all those thoughts that start to run through your mind, they actually fuel fantasies that are among the most unhealthy that any of us can entertain. We start to think, if only I had married someone else, if only I hadn't stepped into this. And your vision of the future starts to become focused on changing the person that you're married to. That might be by leaving the person you're married to and finding someone else. Or it might be that you, in your mind, think, I have a project on my hands. I want to stay married, so I got to get them to change. But one of the ways that we know this breaks down is when we think that marriage was about finding the right person and that person should bear the burden of fulfilling my needs. One of the great stresses that gets placed on marriages is that many of us tend not to look at our own faults, but to see the faults of the person that we're married to. And when we place the burden on someone else of becoming someone else, it's actually like putting a noose around their neck. Instead, whether you're married or whether you're single, the proper step is to look within. Let me share with you this quote that I heard from Tim Keller. He wrote a great book that I'm going to recommend later that is called The Meaning of Marriage. And he did a talk at Google that included this segment. Keller says we should pay attention to our flaws. You may be a fearful person with a tendency to great anxiety, a proud person with a tendency to be selfish, an inflexible person with a tendency to be demanding, an undisciplined person with a tendency to be unreliable, a perfectionistic person who tends to be too critical of other people, an impatient, irritable person who tends to hold grudges, a cowardly person who tends to twist the truth to look good. Everybody comes into marriage with stuff like that. And you know your siblings told you about it, your parents told you about it, but you kind of wrote it off. You really don't think it's as serious as people say, and so it's never really sunk in. Your flaws have not sunk in. And then you get married. And now the same flaws that created small problems for you in other relationships create big problems in this relationship. So after Tim Keller so kindly describes all of our flaws to us, he then tells a story. He says when he was a little kid that there was a stone bridge near his home. And he would always go to that stone bridge, and he learned later that there were fissures and small cracks in it that you couldn't see when it was just standing there. But if a big truck came across the bridge, it all of a sudden showed all the flaws. And he says marriage is actually a lot like that truck. It simply reveals what is already there, but in ways that are now undeniable and can have a great catastrophe. And I want us to think about this a little bit, because whether you're married or whether you're single, we all are that bridge. And part of the idea is that we should be focusing on ourselves and becoming the right person instead of living out the right person myth. The idea that once you find the right person, then everything will be all right. And of course, this is what the scriptures teach us when it zeroes in on the idea of love. Now, 1 Corinthians chapter 13 was not written to be read at weddings, but I read it at just about every wedding that I do. It's actually a very beautiful picture of love, and there's no way I can describe all the elements of it today. But whether you're single or whether you're a couple right now, let me just draw 3 concepts from the very first line of this description of love. The very first words are, love is patient. Love is patient. What does that mean in any relationship? It means that I won't pressure you. Love never pressures the other person. It always creates space so that someone can experience grace and transformation themselves. And you and I know this. If someone in our lives is pushing and pushing and pushing on us, it doesn't feel like they love us. And even if they say, I love you, we know that they are not loving us in that moment. Of course, when we flip it and think about the times that we place pressure on other people, when we think the other person needs to change, that's where we'll find happiness, we start to understand that's not love at all. And you see, the thing about these characteristics is that they don't emerge by making a vow. They don't just become qualities of your life when you get married. They are characteristics of who we are, both before we're married and after we're married. Another one of the lines says, love does not envy. Envy is actually a comparison word. It says that I look at you and I compare you to someone else, and you end up on the short end of the stick. And one of the things that we see in relationships is if we're so focused on comparing the person that we're with to other higher standards, they can't win. Have you ever had the situation where husbands, you compared your wife's cooking negatively to your mother's cooking? How'd that go for you? Not well, I assume, as it shouldn't. When your loved one tells a story, You should be the first one to jump in and celebrate it rather than comparing it to someone else or something else that was better. This comparison game is what we get in the 10 Commandments when it says you shouldn't covet your neighbor's wife. If the thoughts ever run through your mind to say, well, I wish my husband were, or I wish my wife were like him or like her, then you've placed expectations on finding the right person that are horrible and someone can never live up to. It always is about introspection. The passage says love is not proud. And I don't know a better description of pride than I don't admit it when I'm wrong. I project it onto someone else. I notice it when other people are wrong. But I'm not doing the work myself to become the person I need to be. Instead, I put the pressure on the other. And if you're single and you do this work in yourself before you're married, it is God's gift to your future spouse. And if you're married and you decide, I'm not looking to change the other person, I'm going to work on me, that is also God's gift to your spouse. You know, the ethic of Christian marriage is outlined in Ephesians 5. In one section, Paul says, husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. And so this is what marriage is, whether you're in one or whether you are aiming to be in one someday. It is an unselfish posture that will give everything that you have for the other. And if you don't do that, you won't be happy. So it's actually what happy people know. So let me give you a couple quick next steps before we go. We have some resources for you. I'm going to recommend a book for married people and a book for single people in my note from Greg this week. If you don't get that yet, sign up in the Suncrest app. I also did Zoom calls this week with a group of married couples and a group of singles so that you could kind of choose your own adventure in that sense, and we'll post those videos this week. And maybe as the very best thing, we're actually starting new groups of people, one for singles and one for marrieds. They're short term, between 2 and 4 weeks long, but it's the perfect chance, if you're not in a group at Suncrest, to start connecting with other people and having really healthy conversations to help each of us grow. And I think you'll find some great friends along the way. My friends, this is what happy people know. Marriage is a covenant, and you have to dismiss the right person myth. Can I pray for us all to experience that right now? God, we come before you, and I pray we come with humility, where each one of us is not listening to this message, hoping someone else is listening, but embracing it ourselves and taking the posture of unselfishness, God, to constantly see that our relationships do character work in us and that that's what we want and desire out of them. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, I really hope that was helpful for integrating faith with life. Listen, if you're in Northwest Indiana, I'd love to have you join us in person. Head over to suncrest.org and plan your visit.